Good morning and welcome to Felixstowe TV Gainsborough studio. You're joining us this morning with the ongoing This Is Your Life story of young Eric, but just a quick announcement of a fun cycle treasure hunt that's going to be used to raise funds for sport relief, and it will be taking place this coming Sunday at 1 p.m. start from the Delwood Avenue Sports Ground. Refreshments available. There is a prize for the outfit who do the best. Family groups, individuals, whatever. But if you're a cyclist and you didn't get the opportunity to ride with the ladies earlier this week, you can do your own show on Sunday starting at 1 p.m. Right, young Eric.
Nice to see you.
Sorry about the promotion of the fun cycle ride. Will you be taking part?
Oh, definitely, yes,
okay.
yes.
I should be doing a little bit.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, we left you, I think, on the high seas, didn't we, last time? You're up in Scotland, providing a very good service to the commissioning of nuclear submarines by providing accommodation.
Oh yes. Now we had the Bembridge, which we were financing, because this was a huge full-size vessel. Yep. And we had the sea training school aboard it, and we were doing a great job of work because we were doing it without draining other people's funds. We were self-financing, which was very important.
Right.
And I did this by chartering it to Vickers, who were then the nuclear submarines were just starting, and so we used to go up to Loch Finn, where they used to lower the submarine to the bottom of the loch to try each piece of equipment individually to see if it would be picked up by sonar.
That's right, we dealt with that
and
last
so
week,
of course yes we did.
Yeah.
So we accommodated all the crew of the submarine, and we also had a huge tank aboard which had the demineralized water, you know, to run the atomic what have you, and so we were doing a very useful service there and a good training for the boys as well.
And equally that gave you sufficient funding to virtually have the boat commissioned for the year.
For the year. This is basically it.
Magic.
It was magic. Yeah. And in fact, one point, I'm changing the subject a little bit, but it gave me great pride because we used to take her over to Jersey and Guernsey. And one day we moored in the harbour at Jersey. Yes. Because we couldn't come alongside, we were too big, you know, so we moored in the bay. Yes. And we went up the Jersey, you know, is up high, and you can look down, see this lovely view of the bay, and there I saw the Bembridge moored, and alongside her was the first of the big sailing ships, you know, training sailing ships. I forgot what they were called now.
Well, I know there was one that was a Winston Churchill.
There's one like that, but I'm
not sure what the first was.
But
they were glorious ships.
Glorious ships.
Absolutely.
But it was such a pride to see these two beautiful vessels there. One by national subscription, people raising so much money, different ways, and there was our one, which was completely getting along self-financing. So
by providing accommodation on the high seas beside a nuclear site.
It reminds me too then, of course, we had a big family at Arundel, and they were all growing up by now and leaving home, and this was why we'd started the sea training school, because we had the spare accommodation in the huge house at Arundel Priory. But one of the joys of it was, of course, that we were able to use the Bembridge as a holiday place. We had a holiday cottage where we used to take the family. I did talk about it at Feltham. But when we had the Bembridge, of course, the boys went home during the holidays, except for 2 or 3 who, half a dozen perhaps, who didn't have homes to go to, and they stayed aboard.
Oh, right.
But so we were able to take the family. The engineer was always available, you know, our Scottish engineer. And so we were able to take the family on holidays.
Oh, right.
And we went to Guernsey and we went to Jersey, and everybody loved it, of course.
Oh, the glorious Channel Islands.
And of course, my son Nick, who with his wife used to do the catering for the boys. Of course, they'd be on holiday. Right. And my wonderful wife, she and Brenda
became ship's cook.
She became ship's cook. So, and it was a lovely time we had. And of course, along the same thing, I've never talked about animals very much.
No, you haven't.
But it reminds me that we have always had dogs, because I believe children should always be brought up with animals, and dogs particularly.
They certainly shouldn't be frightened of them.
And we've always had dogs of different breeds. But Blair, you know, the boy, my son, who we put with the Sunday Express photography, he, of course, they'd done run a story about the biggest dogs in the world, and there was a lovely one about the not the Irish Wolfhounds, Great Danes.
Yes.
And there was a lovely article about this biggest Great Dane in the world.
Right.
And of course, Blair, he's got a very inventive mind and very curious. So he found out who was the breeder, and he said we ought to have one of these. So I went to see her, and we got one of these Great Danes called Poochie. She had a very big, long proper name.
Yes,
we used to call
Kennel Club name.
We used to call her Poochie. And she was a wonderful dog. And all this time when we were doing the Bembridge, we of course had Poochie as well. So
on board?
Poochie used to come aboard as well. Really? And so it was really a family ship when we had the holidays in.
I can imagine a Great Dane.
But
up and down the companionways. It was
a tremendous upheaval when the boys went back, because you see we had to. You know, we had very good boys, but amongst them were some of the most difficult youngsters in England.
I'm sure there were. When you went off to the Channel Islands and elsewhere, you still kept your relationship with the Admiralty Ferry.
Oh, we used to use the Bembridge.
Right.
This was part of the exercise for the Sea Training School. We used to have the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association officers aboard for training, so we used to use it as a training ship for the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association.
And you also had sea cadets, did you say?
Oh yes, and same thing again. The sea cadets, you remember, Navy used to provide us with the inshore minesweepers.
That's right.
That's where I had my master's ticket and my skipper's ticket with the RNXS. And we used to take the sea cadets, and so now we started doing that with the Bembridge as well.
So it's a multi-purpose.
Oh, multi-purpose. Yeah, in fact, it gives me a memory there because it shows me somehow I've had a very high regard for my boys. And on one occasion, we had the sea cadets aboard, and we steamed into Guernsey.
As you do.
As you do.
Yeah.
The entrance into Guernsey was very difficult because for a big ship. You had to go in, a very narrow entrance, then you had to swing round to starboard very sharply to get in. So we always had to have a tug to push the bow thrusters. We didn't have bow thrusters in those days. But on this occasion, that, as I say, gave me such a regard for my boys.
Right.
We went into, we were lying alongside because there's a proper docks in Guernsey. We were lying alongside, and suddenly there was a fire in the engine room.
Not good.
And I heard the scuffle and what's it, and they called up. And I went down there, and there's a huge engine room, you know, because it's a full-size vessel. And in those days, they did have big engine rooms, not sealed engine rooms as you've got today.
No, and you just flood it with CO2.
And there was this, maybe 10 or 15 people trying to fight the flames. But I noticed...
So what was on fire?
It was the steering motor. You see, the steering motor,
so it was aft.
The rudder was so huge that you had an electric motor as big as this settee, which used to move the rudder. When you turned the wheel, you didn't have to put a lot of force into the wheel. You just turned the wheel, it automatically controlled the motor, which moved the rudder.
Absolutely.
And it had caught fire.
Not good.
And of course, I went down, and I stood at the top of the ladder, and there were the officers of the sea cadets. There's nothing detrimental. They were scared, and they were running out of the engine room.
Whoops!
One of them actually leapfrogged across one of our boys who was leaning down to try and get something.
Oh right!
The engineer, the old deaf engineer, marvellous boy, because he regarded his equipment like something precious. He was fighting the fire with a fire extinguisher, and the boys were all helping and putting things on it to try and put the flames out. But all the sea cadets out. You know, by themselves. So I couldn't stay because I thought, well, we need a fire engine. So I went up to the bridge and radioed for help, and unfortunately a fire engine came within 5 minutes, very efficient.
Brilliant.
And they, of course, ran the hoses down and put the fire out.
Did they?
But it was quite an experience, but it gave me such a, how should I say, such a regard for my lads. They didn't just run off, they put the fire out. They stayed and helped to do it. So I had a great
very gutsy.
Admiration
I mean, engine room fires are notorious.
But you see, some of those boys were so intelligent that I mean, I remember one of these boys. in fact, I hope he did very well with himself. I remember him standing in front of my desk at Arundel Priory, and he said, "I could take anything off your desk, sir, without you knowing it." I said, "You couldn't." He said, "I can."
He did.
And so he stood in front of me, and I can't remember what he did, something very special, but with his hand, he distracted my attention, and he'd taken something off the top of my desk. I certainly didn't see it, but I think
you should have taught him some of your magic tricks.
I should
or
have
perhaps he could have taught you some.
Maybe he could have taught me some. I think you've got something there. But they were very inventive.
Yes, they are.
But a lot of them had difficulties which people weren't aware of. No. There was one boy I remember, and I think this applies today. It's not just him, but I was taking him home. I took a lot of them at the end of the term. I used to help them on the way to go home.
Right.
And we stopped at a traffic light or something, and I said, "Well, he didn't see that sign, did he?" Somebody whizzed by.
Oh, right.
And he said, "Oh," and he looked, and I realised he couldn't read the sign.
No.
And so when he came back at the beginning of the new term, I tested him. He couldn't read at all, and yet there was nothing on his records that he couldn't read. He had always adapted. He knew how to copy, and he kidded people, and nobody was aware of it.
No. In my brief period in prison for 2 days, half of the juveniles that were there could not read.
Let me try and finish this story. Where was I? So what I did, I found a volunteer university student.
Oh, right.
And she came and stayed with us. She came for a 3-week holiday. She stayed with us for 3 weeks. I put her one-to-one with that boy, and at the end of 3 weeks he could read and he could write.
Well,
so, you know, this is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it can be fixed.
It can be fixed.
Yeah.
And I understand that today there's a tremendous percentage, an actual percentage of youngsters leaving school and they're semi-illiterate.
Yeah.
Something's wrong, you know.
Well, it's those who fall through the grid, isn't it, Eric? And you were obviously picking some of those up.
Well, in those days they were. But
you know, all the assessments sort of autism and conditions that tend to, you'd have thought they would be recognised, it would be done. And I mean, when you were there and I was there, we were considered, or they were considered, just thick and not educatable.
Well, this is right.
And that's never really been true.
Yeah.
Right, onwards we go.
Yes.
We're in Guernsey. We've had a fire. Steering now has got to be fully mechanical.
Oh, yes. And that's meant
hard,
hard work.
Very hard work.
And, of course, that had its consequences as well.
Did it?
Because afterwards, fairly quickly afterwards, because then I had it repaired, obviously, but before we had it repaired...
Expensive.
We nearly became a national incident.
Oh, did you?
Because we were going into Cowes Harbour, and there's a bar as you go into Cowes Harbour, and you have to swing round very quickly
into the channel
to port to avoid this bar. And of course we came up to it. I said harder port. The boy on the wheel, of course,
couldn't pull up,
and he couldn't get it round, and we ran aground.
Oh dear.
Which is a major,
on a falling tide.
On a falling tide, and there we were stuck.
Oh dear.
And of course the press got hold of it.
Oh, right.
And the first I heard of this was a phone call from my wife saying that the press had been on to her, saying that what about the Sea Training School? We understand their vessel has run aground in Cowes Harbour as a result of a fire.
Oh, love it.
And it was, and said we're sending half a dozen reporters coming down in different papers, coming down at 6 o'clock to cover it. And I thought, my God, you know, I didn't want this broadcast all over the country that we'd run aground and all the bits and pieces about it. And so, fortunately, by luck, high tide was, I think, at 2 o'clock.
Right.
And I thought, well, if I get it off and away, I shall be away. No, I won't go into Cowes because they would the first place they'd go. So, fortunately, the tide came
full
in.
astern. Get out of there.
We got up. and I steamed right upriver, so out of the way where they couldn't get me, you know. And so we avoided a public incident, which would have been all over the press. And so that was a good thing.
Well, it would have questioned the competence of whatever. But then running, I mean, in those days, you built ships that were actually strong enough to actually go around, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
I mean, now you got a hose of whatever and.
But coming back to the story with cows, one of the problems was, just to give you some of the incidents we had to put up with, and this was part of the training of the boys. I haven't told you a story about the Cows Yacht Club, have I? No. Well, you see, this is one of the reasons why we left Cows.
Right.
You remember when Marion, my wife, made the suggestion of having a sea training through aboard a ship.
She did.
Because if they fall out with people,
you can sail away.
On to go
just
away.
Sail away.
And so she proved so right, as women always do, because I obviously was still having the priory, so I used to go backwards and forwards by car, across by ferry, and then long onto the Isle of Wight, back down to the ship.
Yes.
And we had an arrangement that there was a jetty, which I used to go to, and I'd get onto the park at this jetty, flash my headlights. The ship would be way out, you know.
Sounds almost like the Cornish wreckers, but go on.
Absolutely. Flash my headlights, they'd flash back, they'd lower a ship's boat, come and pick me up and take me back.
Sensible.
It worked very well.
Yeah.
On this particular occasion, I flashed my headlights, they flashed back, and I sat back waiting, usually 10 minutes, and I was picked up. Went on and on and on. I flashed my headlights again, they flashed me back again. Still nobody came. I thought, what's happening?
Yeah.
What's it?
No
but
mobile phones.
Eventually, after half an hour, the ship steamed in. The boys, we had a bit of a delay, but so I got aboard and went back to the ship.
Right.
But later on, of course, I found the reason for it.
Right.
Because I tended to investigate things. And I found that what had happened, they'd lowered the boat. They, instead of coming straight to me, they'd steamed across the river, downriver, to the Cows Yacht Club.
Oh, right.
They'd broken in, pinched a whole load of cigarettes.
Wow.
Put the cigarettes under my seat at the stern.
So you're the receiver.
So all the way back, I was sitting on the stolen goods. When we got back, so when I discovered it, I got all the cigarettes, returned them to the Cows Yacht Club, and steamed away straight away, because I thought,
no, you wouldn't be welcome there.
But we had a number of interesting incidents of a semi-similar nature in a way. There was one in France with a French port.
Oh, right.
And you see, I'd made arrangements we'd have an exchange, but not an exchange visit, but a visit to a French sea training school.
Right.
And we arranged to go to France. I won't mention the port for reasons which will come obvious in a minute.
Well, we don't want a third world war, do we?
We don't.
No, we haven't fought the French for a long time.
So we got to this port.
Right.
And we had a lovely time. The boys from the French school would come aboard the vessel, our vessel, and our boys would go to the French school, and it was progressing very nicely. You know, I thought, well, this is a really nice, teaching the youngsters to meet the different culture and everything. And then one day, because we had quite a wide age range, this youngster, one of the younger ones, came up to me in my cabin and said, "Sir, they won't let me play with the motorbikes." I said, "Play with the motorbikes? What do you mean?" And so I said, "Come and show me. Come and show me." So he took me down. We went down the gangplank onto the harbour. He took me down, and there along a wall was about 6 or 8 motorbikes.
They'd acquired it.
Just let me tell you the story. 6 or 8 motorbikes. So obviously I started investigating, and I found that what these wretched had done, they'd gone round the town and stolen all these bikes, and they were playing with these bikes there. So I thought, well, this is going to cause an incident, an international incident, because, so I called a meeting of the officers and the boys, and I said, look, this is absolutely impossible. We can't have an incident like this. I said, I want all these bikes returned to where they were found, or where you acquired them.
Yep.
And high tide, we can steam out at high tide. I think it was in an hour's time or 2 hours' time. I said, we're going to catch the tide and we're departing now. I give our apologies to the sea school, but we're gone.
Yes.
So everything went to plan. They came back, everybody got aboard, and we steamed out on the high tide. Once we were out in the channel, this boy who was the ringleader of it, he came up, he said, "Can I see you for a minute, sir?" I said, "Yes, I want to see you." And he said, "You've got nothing to worry about, sir," because I'd explained to them, you know, the problem. He said, "There's not going to be any problems at all." He said, "No problems." I said, "Why is this?" He said, "Well, we talked it over together, and we thought the easiest way to do it is if we get rid of the bikes." And I said, "Get rid of the bikes?" He said, "Yes." So what we did, sir, he said, "We've pushed them all into the dock. So somewhere there's a French port there with
6 or 8 bikes.
6 or 8 bikes at the bottom of the dock." So there's nothing I could do to recompense, nothing I could do without creating an incident. And it's but it gives you an instance of the type of things.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of those boys are now in jobs in seamanship. You know, they've done very well for themselves, and it made a lot of difference to their lives. But some of the troubles we had in coping with them, and I mean, just to give you a little instance, further instance, I've given you several so far, but I mean, if you weren't careful, you would find that rather than wash up a lot of dirty saucepans, they'd throw them overboard.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding, my dear. So you had to take precautions, and you know, you had to think one step ahead.
You virtually need one-to-one supervision.
Well,
and you
couldn't do it in those days.
No.
Today they might, but, you know, with loads of money.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was a problem.
So what did you tend to do then? Weed out the ringleaders and get rid, or
oh no, I always used to try. And I don't know whether it was my long talks or what it was, but I don't think they liked my long talks.
No.
And they did try, and I don't know how I got through to them, but I did get through to them, and a lot of them have made good use of their lives, and they switched it off.
Yeah.
But you know, it was a major problem. But the thing is, today, you know, they've got a lot of special treatment. They've realised a lot of his mental conditions, and they've coped with it. But in those days, what I think we did was very
well, you just got on with
and
it,
there wasn't
didn't you,
the money in those days.
You know, you were expected to get on with it.
We were expected to get on with it. But coming back to the story, let me try and think of something which I should tell you about, which was very relevant to it, because time is now. We've got a few minutes to do with it. I've told you about the Cowes Yacht Club. One of the interesting things is about the ship's captain. People don't realise it, but a ship's captain is responsible for the entire vessel and everyone on it at all times, whether he's lying in his bunk or on the bridge. Absolutely. He's responsible. Yeah. And, you know, this can be a lesson for everybody, I think, from the Prime Minister downwards.
It's on you.
Just to give you an instance of it, because it's quite important. When a ship goes into port, you take a pilot aboard, because obviously he knows the local thing. And although the pilot is commanding the vessel, the captain is still responsible.
Indeed he is.
And I remember this, I think it's probably one of the only occasions any captain has overruled a pilot.
It's been a few.
We were coming into this harbour. It was abroad on the continent somewhere, I can't remember which one it was. And of course the Bembridge, it had 2 screws, you know, propellers.
Yes.
Normally, if you have a 2-screwed ship, they go in the opposite directions. But on the Bembridge, they both turn the same way, which meant that you could swing round to starboard. You could turn to starboard very easily because they were turning it round. But if you tried to go to port, it was hard work to get round to port, because the stern was trying to go the opposite way.
The response time would be
we were steaming into this harbour, and he had it on at half speed, coming in at tremendous knots, and I knew he would not be able to turn to port to get in because of the speed we were going and the action of the propellers. And I said to him, watch this, you're going too far. He said, oh no, he said, I know. So I overruled him, and I said, you know, I can't remember what I went to, stop engines or what have you,
right.
and overruled him, and we slowed down and we got in safely. But I thought then, I was horrified that I was overruling a pilot.
No. But the obligation is yours. I mean, if we look at the Italian skipper who lost the Korean one, they are responsible, aren't they?
Well, of course.
You know, the people's lives are their responsibility.
And you see, one of the reasons why, in the end, I decided I was going to give up the Bembridge was because I forget which port we were in, and I suddenly looked down and I saw one of the boys walking down the gangplank carrying 2 big bags.
Oh, yes.
So I immediately called him back, you know, sent an officer and got him back. And I came in, and what do I find in the bags? Essential engine spares. You see, if you're out at sea and something goes wrong, you can't call in a fire brigade or somebody to come and repair. You've got to deal with it yourself. So you've got to have a very essential spares, which are critical spares. So if something goes wrong, you've got these spares. And there were all these parts. And I said, "What are you going to do with this lot?"
Scrap.
He's going to sell them for scrap. So he would have got about a couple of pounds for spares, which worth such a lot of money. And not only it wasn't the money that worried me, it was not having it. Lives could be at risk. And I realised then that I had to weigh up, you know, because we were using it as a sea-going vessel.
Oh, absolutely.
And I couldn't risk the lives of people. So this was one of the reasons why I decided.
So did you wrap up the sea school then?
I did. Well, I didn't wrap it up then, but I came to the conclusion that we ought to be finalising on it because it was a marvellous effort and it worked. But could I risk people's lives if the boys could do so many things?
That was just plain silly, wasn't it?
So, but anyway, that's probably the next chapter.
Indeed,
I think time has come to an end.
Okay, well, here we are, Felix Stowe TV, Gainsborough Studio. Lovely for sharing this reminiscences of Eric. We are on episode, who knows, but it's quite a high number. Look forward to seeing you next Friday. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend. Lovely weather forecast. Bye-bye.